All right, I'm just going to talk, I think, for about 10-15 minutes, and I want to make this fairly interactive. In some respects, this is a procurement programme, but I haven't got procurement in the title because I've been at the conference all day today. I think some of the presentations will be really interesting about the challenges that local authorities face. And I think that one of the reasons why those challenges come about is we tend to work in local authorities in quite tightly defined functional silos. And as I think it was Catherine who said during the Q&A session, the procurement function in local authorities is quite far down. In fact, she said it was the bottom of the food chain in local government. And whether or not that analysis is absolutely correct, is, I think, one of the reasons why. Don't think about the word procurement or the procedure of being compliant with EU regulations or whatever else it is people think. But it's one of the reasons why local authorities' total engagement with the supply market that serves it is really, really suboptimal, because it tends to be looked at an individual or a small group of authority levels. So you've got a lot of duplicated engagement with the supply market. I mean, Northgate, for example, have got over 1,000 local authority contracts. Many of the contracts are for effectively the same sorts of things. So we don't have the kind of commercial engagement with our supply market that will help us in meeting those challenges that have got nothing to do with the process of procurement, about how we innovate our services, how we get software that works, how we get applications that work, how we can develop new applications. So it's in that context that I think this programme has some importance. So the things I'll talk about: what are the drivers for collaboration? ICT is one of only 3 categories that the Local Government Association would like to see managed in a more coherent way at a national scale. We kicked off a programme in London going back to around about March 2012. So I'll talk a little bit about what we've achieved and what the goals and key initiatives are. I'll say a little bit more about the software challenge because I think it's quite a good example in microcosm of a lot of money being spent in a highly fragmented way in a market which is not delivering for local government. Talk a little bit about the role of CIOs. They've been absolutely fundamental to the London programme. And then if we have time, I know it's near the end of the day, I'm happy to have a fairly open discussion. So why collaborate at all? Increased supply market leverage. This is not just about let's put all our volumes together and get a better price. In some markets that's the right thing to do. For fairly simple commodity markets you would say that makes some sense. But it's actually about engaging with the supply market in a strategic way at the scale at which our operations are in aggregate in order to help them drive the kinds of change and innovation that we need to see in how the services get delivered. One of the things that really sticks with me since I started on the programme is individual CIOs, some extremely talented people coming from all sorts of backgrounds, the blue chip companies, the finance sector, saying that when they arrived in a local authority position, they were astonished, and this is their words, at the disdain at which major suppliers would treat requests, to resolve problems. So that's one of the effects of the disaggregation that we have, is that we don't have the level of strategic engagement with Microsoft, with Capita, that our net total spending would in other circumstances justify. So it's about managing that. About shared technology strategies, there are 353 local authorities in England, so over I think 450 odd when you count the rest of the UK. And each of those organisations is facing similar problems and developing solutions, often in quite deep isolation. You begin to see bits and pieces of sharing in small regions, but generally speaking, we've got a lot of, call it what you will, but intellectual capital about addressing some of these problems that we simply don't have a mechanism to share. So we've got a lot of resources dedicated to resolving the same problems, and therefore probably not getting the best out of the resources that we have. So it's about trying to drive, when I say common, I don't mean one size fits all, I just mean we probably don't need 353 different sizes. So common solutions to some common challenges. And by challenges, I don't mean challenges in procurement, I mean the kinds of things that all the speakers were addressing today. They need to manage improved and increasingly digitalised citizen services at a time when you've got really very, very serious constraints on budgets. Another issue, and again this is getting resolved in a piecemeal way in slight shared service developments, is how we use our resources. If you take, let's just pick out the hat, the northeast of England, which has 12 local authorities. They've each got 12 buying departments. Those 12 buying departments will all be doing very similar things with the same supply base. They could probably do that fewer times and release those resources to look at some of the innovation challenges that we're talking about today. It strikes me as kind of odd when you consider how much duplication we have in resources, that from an earlier slide that came up today, the biggest challenge to introducing innovation was apparently there wasn't the time to do it. There's plenty of time to do it if the resources are organised in a different way than they are now and the duplication is less. One of the reasons why CIOs got interested in this programme, CIOs are not generally interested in the mechanics of procurement. Procurement's often seen as a kind of compliance issue, but they can see that it's a way to try and drive improvement in citizen services and their own internal ICT strategies by increasing the leverage they have with common suppliers. And if we do all of that, it could contribute to meeting some of the local government funding challenge going forward. The roots of this project sit with local government. Let's got to be really clear about that. In London there are 33 local authorities. They formed it as a finance initiative. It was chaired by a finance director, a London Procurement Strategy Board. They did some fairly basic analysis of their spending and they found what they would have expected to find, which is a high degree of supply side concentration and a very low degree of procurement coordination, all engaging the same suppliers differently. In ICT, the figures are really, really staggering. They were able to map, and it's probably an underestimate in London, but able to map around about 320 million of ICT spend across a total of over 1,500 discrete suppliers. And we cleaned up the supplier database, so we're not reporting BT 17 different times or whatever it might be. Those 1,500 suppliers supplied £320 million of expenditure. The top 14 of those suppliers accounted for 167 million, over half. I mean, it's a really extreme example of that kind of a Pareto principle. Because it was driven by local government, and there's lots of these collaboration initiatives, and again it was mentioned earlier today, a lot of these pilot type projects get started and you get somewhere and you kind of stumble. So the procurement head at the time at Camden was quite well networked with the then Managing Director of Government Procurement Service. And I'm employed by Government Procurement Service, but I've been working on location in Camden for about 18 months. He simply approached him and said, can you give us some project resource so I'm not constantly relying on begging a bit of somebody's time from Enfield and somebody else's time from Haringey. The first thing that I did was get in touch with Jeff Connell and the CIO networks in London. So London Socitm branch that Jeff chairs, but also his London Connects group. And we set up a governance thing whereby we said we only want to do things that CIOs want us to do. You know, we're not going to come and create stuff and try and sell it to you. What is it you would like us to do? So we developed a programme of work, the things that we've already delivered, and a wireless concession contract for London. That's going to generate between 20 and 40 million of income for the 11 or so participating authorities over the 7 to 10 year period it runs from. And we did quite a bit of work around, we did a bit of investigation of the possibility of application consolidation, of data centre consolidation, and some work around improving our procurement techniques a little bit, so a bit more use of e-auctions and so on. The local government association have been working for some time on a national procurement strategy and decided, given the work that was emerging from London and the sort of traction it was getting, the level of engagement it had with CIOs, to make, and the challenges in London ICT are replicated everywhere else, is to make it one of their national categories that they manage. We're looking to kind of do that in two ways. One is to tap into and help to energise and mobilise individual regional groups that might be addressing quite different priorities. So for example, there's a programme about to get underway in the West Midlands, and there's also some quite strong ICT networking in the northwest through the AGMA group. So for the ICT programme, it's about trying to extend the London programme by having replicated regional programmes that look at some of the commercial issues around ICT, and then where there are things that operate on a national scale, to try to operate nationally where we can. So what we achieved, effective co-working with CIOs, probably the best CIO procurement partnership at that scale that I'm aware of. Very, very good quality granular information. We couldn't get it from local authorities, so we got Finance Director permission to approach common suppliers with basically a standard data template that gave us very deep insight into the kinds of price differentiation there was, especially in the software market, and the kind of drivers for that price differentiation. The collaborative wireless concession contract I've mentioned, for those of you who don't know what that means, it's simply that councils are renting what they call street furniture, for the most part lampposts, to telecoms companies who pay to rent the lamppost so they can fit a wireless device to it. And that's what generates income, so that's an income generating agreement. An agreed programme of work on future procurement and technology priorities. The LGA support gives local government some real weight behind trying to drive better commercial value in ICT. The partnership with GPS has been extended, so after about 9 months, GPS authorised the recruitment of 2 posts that were actually advertised as Camden-based posts, and they're fully GPS funded. So we've been a team of 3 in London since around about May this year. The total benefits we delivered in year 1, but mostly we're just laying groundwork, was about 2.5 million. A lot of that came out of a supplier relationship development programme we ran with 5 of the key software suppliers. A lot of the activity isn't about procurement per se, it is about getting better commercial value. So one of the things that a paper is going to the London Connects group, Jeff Connell's London CIO group, which meets this Friday, on a desktop migration, because everyone needs to get off Microsoft XP. Some already are off Microsoft XP, a number aren't. They're going to be facing similar challenges about getting off XP and getting onto Windows 7 or Windows 8 or whatever it is they want to do. The CIOs, when they were discussing this, said it's not necessarily just a Microsoft project, there is a possibility of taking a holistic view of desktop delivery across London. The real challenge there is going to be getting a pool of technical experts. They exist, there's a lot of good technical people in London, able to be organised in such a way that they're delivering services pan-London and not only for their own authority, and making sure that if one authority is giving quite a lot of learning or experience in one place, it isn't just the giver that also gets some benefit in other things. That's always a difficult thing to manage. There's also a proposal on data centres. We've got a really up-to-date map on data centre in London, when the key decision points are for renewal, what the spare capacity is, and we really hope as a minimum that we can generate an effective internal market so that good quality surplus capacity is used across boroughs rather than additional capacity being purchased. Again, conceptually it's very simple, delivering it's quite difficult. BT has got touch points with I think every public sector organisation that there is. It has a memorandum of understanding for some of the services with GPS, basically ceiling prices. It's not been particularly well communicated by BT, so we're working closely with authorities in London to begin with to get that implemented wherever it delivers value. When it doesn't deliver value, clearly we don't implement it. G-Cloud. I think G-Cloud is one of the most exciting things that's happened in the ICT procurement, partly because of the way in which it changes procurement as well as what it delivers by using a catalogue. And the sorts of things it does that are different is absolute transparency on price, absolute transparency on who's bought what from whom. And G-Cloud's beginning, if you go on their website and you can access it from any computer at all, you can find out the ways in which sales through G-Cloud are beginning to grow in an exponential way. One of the challenges in local government around G-Cloud is how does it fit with current procurement procedures and practices and so on. So we're hosting a session, we're hosting it next Monday. It's at the Camden Town Hall in the Council Chamber. It's a national event, we've got a lot of interest in it. About 40 or 50 authorities will probably come along, and we've been supported at that event by Government Digital Service. The software applications procurement is the biggest thing we're attempting to do. It's a £500 million market. We're looking to build up the same degree of CIO engagement nationally as we have in London. So last Thursday, Terry Brewer and myself presented to the local CIO council. Obviously, I'm here today at Socitm, and I've been at Socitm regional events in the West Midlands and of course in London. I've been quite prepared to go to every Socitm region and try and present this stuff and get some plan of action about how we move forward with it. And we also have a national operation procurement capability. It's not just GPS, it's GPS working with the major local authority buying organisations. So all of the frameworks, there was 3 pins published this week. The pin for the software applications was published some months ago. All of those are combined procurement efforts with GPS, YPO, ESPO, LIPO and CBC in Hampshire. So why is the software applications a challenge? There's at least 500 million a year spent on support and maintenance on line of business software applications. So this is in addition to the spending on ERP systems and CRM. This is revs and bends, it's housing, it's parking, it's social care. Every council I've spoken to has got the same sorts of issues. They don't believe they're getting value for money. They don't believe the technology meets the need. And there are often support issues with the suppliers. It varies from supplier to supplier, but you often hear of poor responsiveness. Part of why that's happened is because of the way in which local authorities have engaged the market. They've almost all sourced these systems historically through independent, single authority tenders. They're extremely expensive for the supply market to bid for. Authorities are also guilty of over-specifying what's called in procurement jargon input-based specifications. So they're telling the supplier down to the last nuance exactly how to deliver the service. And of course, the supplier's going to lap that up, because as soon as you make a change, and you're going to have to, because nobody can control 400 pages of detail, as soon as you make a change, it's a change control cost. And you hear lots of noise about change control costs. Authorities are also in the past been a little bit guilty of matching their spend to their budgets. And because the budgets are disaggregated across business leads, it's often we don't really care so much about the comparative value, but we need this service for this price. And our suppliers are quite prepared to operate in that kind of market. Because we've got those bespoke deployments and a licensing model that means you, generally speaking, own the license and pay a percentage, and an increasing percentage year on year for support and maintenance. We found that in London, when we looked at a single application, this was the spread in support and maintenance costs. The lowest cost was around about £26,000. The highest cost was over £150,000. The lowest cost had competed in that market within the last 18 months. The highest cost was running a contract that established in 1994. What Jeff Cornell memorably described as the reverse loyalty scheme for local government. We have our serious lack of transparency. All of these individual contracts usually have confidentiality clauses. Those clauses don't help local authorities. It makes a lot of sense if you're planning to go out for a major social care system renewal, that you know who's done it recently, who engaged, how did they structure their bids, what bids did they get back. It would make a lot of sense to know that. And why shouldn't you know it? It's public money after all. So we need to drive much greater transparency, which gives much better control. All in all, we have an environment of waste and lost opportunity, but it's not just on the price basis. We're often not getting the best at the supply market that exists. The way that we structure our deals means that we can't often get the best out of their capability, whether it's to do with hosting or business design consultation, and we're trying to address those things too. So we're planning a procurement that will be live from the 1st of April 2014. That will be a common procurement platform which enables access to all the major systems, and we hope from all of the major suppliers. It partly depends on how they respond, but we've done quite deep supplier engagement across the piece, and as I think I've been saying repeatedly, that there's enough incentive for suppliers to try and get a much more efficient commercial engagement with local government, so they're working with it. We want to make commodity unit costs explicit. We should probably be able to catalogue a support and maintenance price. That would probably mean you don't have to go out to tender again if you're happy with the system, but you're getting pressure from your internal legal team about when the last time was you went to market for this. So we're looking to catalogue those kind of things. If we can catalogue it, then there's flexible access. So it doesn't matter what the origin of, let's say, your OLM system was. If you've got a price for OLM support, it might be banded, it might be banded by population size or in some other way, you say, I'll just buy that from there. Simple as that. You don't have to do anything else, you already own the licence. But we realise that councils are not going to be able to move from a very highly differentiated to a very common operating environment in a single step. So the procurement will also allow, we hope in groups rather than individual authorities, but individual authorities can construct their own competition and they'll give more advice about how to do it faster and better. So you're accessing the same supply market as you would be anyway, but you're doing it in a slightly more structured way in a way that gives you access to more information. We want to be able to use all the available technology models, so the hosted systems, the traditional, and I think increasingly outmoded license system, and help manage the transition to software as a service. Because I think in the long run, and I don't know how you define the long run, whether it's 2 years or 5 or longer, but I think most of these software services will be on a subscription-based model, possibly with a minimum term contract. I would imagine that's the way the technology will evolve. In terms of supplier management, we're going to have a standard service level agreement, an SLA, and it's going to be based around, and CIOs are really, really keen on this, getting access to APIs, enabling these technologies to be innovated with after they've been installed, either in-house or through small consultants. So we'll have a law that enables small specialist consultants to help work across those vertical silos. And all of it has been developed and it's going to be owned by and used by local government. Now, if we hit the absolute best result, I think we could easily strip half the total cost, not half the price, half the total cost of running and managing these systems if we can move to a more common and more commercially mature way of doing it. What's the role for CIOs? In London we use CIOs to give us top-level technical governance, to set the technical agenda. We report to Jeff Connell's London Connects meeting each time it meets, and one of the things I'd be quite content to set up is having a similar reporting structure to the 9 regional Socitm meetings. It's about getting contacts. We've got some good contacts now across the country, but making sure that we can build a consensus, because CIOs aren't a uniform group. They've got different senses of how they think ICT should be developed in local government, different senses of what they think the role should be. But we don't need 353 strategies. It might be we need to start combining around where there is consensus and working to generate consensus where it makes sense to do so. And I think the project as a whole does provide a way for local government to interact in the ICT market with central government. So for example, the software applications procurement, that was signed off before any of the others. I know that there's a great deal of legitimate tension around some of the PSN and COCO issues, but one of the things that, for example, we did in London at quite an early stage was have Jeff and his colleagues have a sit down with Andy Nelson, and Andy was the CIO for government, and we hope to be able to generate that kind of informal communication between Liam Maxwell and others at the Cabinet Office that have got a central role in setting ICT policy. I should say that what the programme is not about is about designing or developing an ICT strategy and trying to impose it on local government. It's not about that at all. It's about how do we enable all the challenges we face in ICT to be executed as commercially sensibly as possible. The Socitm guys can issue these and you'll have my contact details, and you're all free to contact me, and I'm happy to take any questions. I don't think I've got anyone running around with a microphone. I don't know if I need that or not. I do.
These sorts of changes is always a risk.
Do you want a microphone? There is one.
Do you work from a London Legacy Development Corporation? There's always a risk in changing processes that will fail, and I've been in the public sector for 18 months and I find that it's pretty risk averse. partly because of, I guess, quite understandably, the accusation that you've failed and therefore you've wasted public money. So, what's the appetite to make these changes? There's going to be some problems which are going to be publicised because that's what the newspapers like to pick up on. I mean, if you've got a sort of like a mutual sort of society whereby you can all sort of like stand behind each other and try and explain why you're doing this.
Okay. One of the things that distinguishes this programme from others is it's not that it's got a great big deal of capital investment up front. We're basically talking about a few dedicated resources that are coming about through GPS. So there's not a great big deal to lose. You're also addressing a market there. LGA had Deloitte do a total analysis of local government spending. When you do these kind of spend analysis, there's always a bit of dispute about whether the figure's accurate or it's not accurate. But Deloitte's estimation was that in 2010-11 financial year, local government was spending 2.2 billion in England on ICT. Now, very little of that 2.2 billion is subject to any kind of aggregated management at all. So in many respects, the scope for improvement is so high that the project failure risk relative to it being able to deliver at least some incremental benefit, I think it's in a fairly sound place, especially when it's got the degree of support that it has from chief information officers. So in London, we've had a deep connection for about 12 months, and we're building that now on a national scale. And because, I mean, when I presented this to the local authority CIO Council, the local CIO Council, last Thursday, Jeff was in the audience, and one of the things he said to Joss, who was chairing the meeting, was, if it gives nothing else, it gives us some resources to help us try to do things we're otherwise not resourced to try to do. So I think the risk of failure, which is, of course, always ever present in local or public sector projects, is to a large extent offset by the big possible gains at relatively little initial investment, and by having the clients own the projects and how it gets delivered. Do you want to ask a question? Thanks very much. It looked like I was going to be talking to myself at 3:30. Maybe I have been to some extent, but thank you. I appreciate your time, especially after a long day. Take care.